Chapter 14. It wasn't always the case the wolf would find its mark by the first full moon. Sometimes it took several cycles before it found someone worthy to pass its blood. John's own wolf had taken 6 weeks to find him. All the journeys were different, though they were also all the same. John thought his nights and days of chasing the raven were over, but instead he was staring at the unflappable bird. He had only found an hour or two of sleep this morning before the raven's incessant cawing pulled him from his slumber. As he forced his eyes open, he realized he had neglected an important addendum to the ceremony. Telling Letha the blood had moved from the wolf to the chosen, Sam. Once she knew, she would start preparing for John's return, and eventually the rest of the ceremony. I should have remembered last night, John thought. Catching the raven would have been much easier in his more beastly form. Of course, it would also be easier if the damn bird just cooperated. Instead, John had spent a good portion of the morning pursuing the raven in circles around the camp. All John needed was a single feather to send Letha the news. John knew it. The bird knew it. John knew the bird knew it, and the bird knew that John knew. With the moon now under the horizon, John was still faster and stronger than any normal man, but a bird has flight, and a witch's bird is particularly savvy. He couldn't help feeling a little resentful. He had traveled over 1,000 miles in the past 2 weeks, following the raven through valleys, fields, and over small mountains. He even overcame last night's trouble with Abbott and his men and managed to complete every task required of him. Well, all except the feather. He tried to reason with the bird, perched just out of reach in a tree. It's just one feather. You knew this was part of the deal. The raven squawked and nimbly flew to a higher branch. I'd rather you just gave it to me, he tried, but the raven didn't move. Looks like I'm climbing, John thought. He grabbed a branch, pulled himself up, and began his ascent. Come on, bird. That's a nice birdie. The raven curiously watched John as he made his way up the tree. John was a good 30 feet off the ground when he finally was high enough to reach the bird. Come on now, I just need one feather. You can even choose which one, he called gently. But the raven wasn't done toying with John quite yet. It gently flapped its wings and landed a few trees away, higher still. Damn it! John looked down at the ground far below. Sam was still soundly sleeping with the wolf's pelt wrapped tightly around him. John had checked the bullet wound earlier. Only a small pockmark was left where it had gone through. John mentally measured the distance between him and the bird, and him and the ground. No sense in climbing down, just to climb all the way back up, John thought. I can jump it. It's not that far. John set his feet on the branch the best he could, bent his knees, and jumped up and away from the tree. He reached out and, sure enough, nabbed a branch at the peak of his leap. His legs swung a bit, and his feet soon found the crook of a limb just below. A laugh of relief escaped him. Not bad after 1,000 miles of running. The raven was 2 trees away, preening and pulling at its feathers. John was sure it was mocking him. So much for this being a friendly, easy event. John calculated it was only one more jump between him and the raven, but it was a big one. Come on, John, you can get that bird. Make the jump and grab it at the same time. He turned away from the bird and called out loudly. No worries. I can just head north without the feather. He tracked the raven at the edge of his vision. I'll just tell Letha what happened, he continued. I'm sure she'll love to hear about how helpful you were about sending word. He moved his feet. It looked like he was going to start climbing down. Sure enough, the raven gave a gentle caw and coo like a sort of raven's compromise. It shuffled on its branch a little, then jumped and opened its wings, quickly gliding to the tree right next to John. John saw the move out of the corner of his eye. Perfect. He turned, jumped, and reached for the raven. Mid-glide, the raven flapped its wings a single time and rose just far enough in the air that John's hand missed by an inch. Flailing, he grabbed at any branch he could, finding only a small offshoot to precariously hang from high above the ground. He clung to it, but could feel it giving way. Crack! There was no limb on the trunk to plant his feet, and he was too far away from any other branch to swing. He was running out of tree. Snap! John fell backwards. The tops of the trees reached into the sky faster and further as he fell. He had just enough time to see the bird squawk with raven laughter as he braced himself for the impact of the ground fast approaching below. Son of a... Suddenly he was suspended mid-air. Phew! All 200-plus pounds of him hung in the leather of his own pelt for a split second before giving way and plopping the last few feet to the ground with a thud. John crawled off his pelt and came to his knees, rubbing and stretching his back. He reached over and gave the pelt an appreciative rub as well. "Good boy," he said. The pelt leaned into his hand. From above, the raven's caws sounded like laughter. It took off from the tree and swooped down at John's head, taunting him. John instinctively reached up and grabbed at the bird, but missed. The raven turned and swooped again, lower this time. Squawk! There was a surprise in the raven's call as it sunk to the ground. The edge of John's pelt had caught the bird's legs and pulled it from the air. In an instant, it had the raven wrapped up completely. John smiled and gave the pelt another scratch of appreciation. "Well done." John brushed himself off and approached the bundled bird. He smiled as he looked down at the raven. He methodically chose a feather, taking his time for a little gotcha emphasis. Finally, he reached out and pulled. Pluck. "Thank you so much," John said with over-sincerity, and his pelt let the raven go. The bird squawked resentfully as it flew to a new perch above. Back at the campfire, John grabbed a stick and stirred the smoldering embers, finding a few that still had red-orange glow. He pinched the quill and bent forward to gently touch the tip to the coals. With a small puff, it caught fire. John brought it up to watch it burn. The bright yellow flame gave off hints of purple and green as it crept down the edges. Over 1,000 miles northeast, Letha looked up from her rocker to see her own raven's feather catch fire in a jar on the mantel. She watched it burn with the same subtle hues of green and purple John was seeing at his campfire. Soon, it was ash. "Well done, John," Letha said aloud. The feather business done, John sat, settled in, and reached for his journal to chronicle the drama of the morning. Instead, he soon found his pencil trailing a squiggled line across the page. Sleep was fast descending upon him in the shade of the very tree he had fallen out of. He and Sam both slept while the sun arced into the sky and traced patterns in the forest floor. As it reached its apex, beams streamed down through the old-growth canopy onto the sleeping Sam. His eyes fluttered under his eyelids, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. In his dreams, images flashed of torches and dogs. There were sounds of screams, of Arabella and the group of men. An old woman's voice murmuring something over him while he was being tucked into bed. The glint of a blade and candlelight blended into the canopies of giant trees reaching into the sky, blocking the sun. One of the tallest, oldest trees started to fall, and just as it crashed into the ground, Sam twitched himself awake. Sam lay still, taking in his surroundings. The raven flew overhead, blocking the sun from Sam's face for a brief second before it disappeared again amongst the trees. Sam's brain was spinning from the strange images his mind had conjured. Were they dreams, or was it the night before? The wolf, Arabella, the dogs and men, the large, ferocious creature. It was the stuff of terrible dreams, but it felt so real. Where am I? This isn't my house, Sam thought. Is this a dream too? Sam slowly looked around. A few feet away, a hole in the ground held a smoldering campfire. Only a periodic wisp of smoke escaped the coals left from the night before. A tingling, then deep ache came from his injured arm and leg. His instinct was to get up and move, but Sam didn't want to disturb him. Across the coals of the fire, a huge man was sleeping with his back against a large pine tree, an open journal on his chest. There was something he recognized in the man, but Sam was also sure he'd never met him. Perhaps it was the distinct white streak that blazed through his otherwise dark hair. Even with his hands folded on his lap, there seemed something ferocious and dangerous about him. He was the type of character a boy wouldn't forget. The raven landed just above the sleeping man, on a thin, scraggly branch. It twitched its head, looked at the man, then over at Sam. It gave a squawk, stirring the man from his sleep. "What now?" the man groaned as he stretched his arms high and his legs long. He inhaled and exhaled as he moved, as if he could breathe out the stiffness. Sam tried to stay quiet, but his leg and arm were burning. He looked down and found he was covered in a wolfskin. Wait, This isn't the wolfskin, Sam thought. He sat up with a jerk and tried to pull it away, but there was a strange pink jelly-like substance making it cling to his skin. A chuckle came from the man. "Afternoon," he said. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was deep. The man glanced at Sam's arm and leg. Sam remembered flashes of the night before, teeth sinking into his flesh, but when he looked down to his arm and leg, they only showed scarring, as if the attack had happened weeks or even months ago. He could feel the scar on his arm pulsing and throbbing. Sam reached down and tried to wipe off the pink goo. "Rubbing it in'll be better," the man offered. Sam raised his eyebrows. "It'll help you heal up." The man nodded. "Go ahead," then rubbed his own arm as an example. Sam reluctantly stroked his hand up and down his scarred arm. The goo was tingly and cooling as it seeped into the wound. To Sam's surprise, the throbbing diminished. He rubbed it into his leg, too. Sam looked back up at the man, who offered a smile with a hint of, "I told you so." Sam traced the slick skin around the small circle of the gunshot wound on his leg and wondered how long it would take to heal. He returned his attention to the man across from him. Sam's mother had always taught him to introduce himself, so he did. "I'm Sam." "John," came the reply. "You a friend of my pa's or something?" Sam asked. "Not yet, but I hope to be once I meet him. If he's your pa, I'm sure he's a nice fellow." Sam's ears recognized something in the voice of the man. Sam suspected this was, indeed, the large dark figure from his strange dreams last night. Was it all a strange dream, or was it one of the few fleeting moments of consciousness in the night? He remembered Arabella on the lawn, then pushing her away to run from the gunshots and the dogs. There was also a huge creature, something with teeth, covered in fur. There was screaming. Sam shook his head to clear his thoughts before managing a question. "Were you in my dream last night?" "I was around last night, yes." John paused. "Usually getting your first bite is an event all on its own, but last night was a little messy." The raven squawked as an added punctuation. "It was the beginning of a journey we're on together now." "First bite?" Sam asked as he looked down at his scar, then scanned the woods for another wolf. "How many are there?" John laughed. "Only one, funny enough." John trailed off as he thought out loud. Why do we call it first bite? It's not like there's a second and third." "I got a second one." Sam held up his arm and pointed to his leg. "1, 2. "I suppose you did, didn't you?" John let out another chuckle of humor of Sam's observation. "That your bird?" Sam continued, pointing at the raven above John's head. "For now," John replied. "I'll return him when we get back home." Home, Sam thought. He quickly got to his feet, tugged at the pelt clinging firm to his leg. Sam was surprised he felt no pain in either scar as he moved. Half a night ago, both his arm and leg were almost bitten clean off, but now he stood tall as if nothing had ever happened. He had to get back to his family. They'd be worried. He stood still for a moment, searching his instincts for a direction to go. He felt himself drawn south. He finally managed to rip the pelt from his body and ran. "Where are you?" John started, but Sam was already out of sight between the trees. The raven squawked. "Dang it," John said under his breath. "He sure likes to run off." Sam knew his mother would be worried and his father would be mad when he came through the door, but he ran as fast as he could anyway. Despite his injuries, he felt faster than usual. At the pace he was going, he'd be home in no time. John packed up camp as fast as he could. Funny enough, following Sam would allow him to finish with the very last thing on his list before heading north, convincing Sam to come to forage with him. If Sam was older, perhaps offering honest, well-paid work would do the trick, but with Sam's younger age, it was prudent to confer with his parents. Convincing a boy's parents he should head north with a stranger would be a challenge, even though John saved the boy's life. He'd have to tell them that Sam was also chosen. Then he would have to explain the wolf and the significance of the bites without sounding like a crazy person. He wasn't exactly looking forward to it. As a last resort, he had the small pouch of gold. It was still surprising to John how clearly money could talk when people couldn't. Sam came out of the woods and into a field of cotton. He picked up the smell of smoke, and the images of torches arcing into the moonlight flashed through his mind. Around him, Tiny pieces of gray ash fell like dark snowflakes from the sky. Sam had a feeling, a very bad feeling, that he knew where the blackened flakes were coming from. Sam reached the edge of the cotton field and leapt onto the dirt road running alongside. Finding it familiar, he turned left and realized the smell of smoke grew stronger as he ran in the direction of his home. There was a swelling certainty that something was terribly wrong. He looked ahead, but there was an absence on the horizon. The fear inside him grew, congealing into a single thought. Where's my house? As he ran, every so often a loud snap sounded and resounded with a strange twang. It seemed to come where his house should be. Finally, Sam slowed in front of a pile of black and gray ash. The cast-iron stove still stood where the kitchen should be, but only a few blackened studs were still standing. A small section of the metal roof leaned up on the thick wood of the upright piano, still throwing small flames. Another snap and twang resounded. Sam realized the sounds he had been hearing were the piano strings snapping as the thick, hard wood on the back weakened from the burning. The shack that Sam had called home his entire life was burnt to the ground. Sam scanned for his mother, father, and the twins, but they were nowhere to be found. In the backyard, the pigs and chickens were squealing in their pens. The swing that hung from the tree, his sister's favorite place, was empty. From the well behind the tree came Auntie, his old neighbor, with a filled bucket in hand. She dropped the bucket and ran. "Sam! My Sam!" she cried as she looked him up and down. "My boy, we thought for sure you were—" Her eyes looked toward the pile of ashes. Sam couldn't move. All the feelings inside him settled into his stomach, and everything just stopped. He dropped to the ground. He reached into the soil, a place he could usually find comfort, but there was none to be had. It felt empty, dry. Silence. He felt the heat from the pile of ashes on his face and bare shoulders. The lingering smoke seeped into his nose, and a swirl of wind sent gray dust into the air. Inside Sam there was no fear, no sadness. He felt nothing. His song ceased. Auntie's husband, Uncle, approached holding a shovel coated in wet ash. His voice was compassionately matter-of-fact. "Son," he said, "they're gone. It's all gone." Uncle and Auntie hadn't been able to stop the flames, only the spread of the fire. They had raked and shoveled a circle around the shack, stomping and throwing dirt onto any of the flames that spread along the ground. In their old age, it was all they could do. Now, only the piano and a few other spots still smoldered in the blackened pile that was once Sam's home. Auntie and Uncle felt a presence over them and turned to see John. "Damn it," John said. Sam put his hands on the ground and rose from his knees onto all fours like an animal. He paced back and forth at the edge of the ashes of the house, snorting through his nose like he was trying to get the smoke to leave his mind. His movements quickened as he grew more and more agitated. Confusion and rage were erupting inside him, an aggressive frustration that he'd never felt before. He wanted to tear something apart. "You best stand back," John said to Auntie and Uncle. Sam clawed at the ground, bared his teeth, and ran right at Uncle, but John stepped in his path. Sam pounded his fist against John's chest. John didn't budge. Sam turned and lunged at Auntie, but John again blocked his way. "Oh, my Lord!" cried Auntie. Sam tried to shove John's immovable mass. Then, with a grunt of Herculean effort, Sam lifted John off the ground. Even John was surprised at Sam's display of strength. John took a deep breath and made himself heavier. Sam strained with all his might, but it wasn't enough. Sam's knees buckled and he released his grip, crumbling to the ground. "Pelt!" John yelled. Sam's pelt leapt onto Sam's back and enveloped him in a tight cocoon. As Sam struggled, John wrapped his arms around him in a fiercely gentle embrace. Swaddled in his pelt, Sam's body stopped fighting and he went limp. The hurricane of emotions subsided. His mind went still. John felt Sam, tearless, break in two. The confusion on Sam's face made John's heart ache. No matter how dire a person's life, if they have their own people, their own family, they can get through most anything. Sam's family had been stripped away from him, and there was an emptiness John recognized. He, too, had lost many along the way. "Breathe," John offered quietly. The pelt relaxed its grip. John knelt next to Sam and put a hand on him. He let a moment pass, counting Sam's breaths. The raven squawked from a tree behind them. John wished they had more time. "I need to take you north," John said quietly. He turned to Auntie and Uncle. "Are you family?" "We've known Sam his whole life," Uncle offered. "We're aunt and uncle by heart, but not by blood. Are you family?" John took a moment to consider the question. "In a way, yes," he said. "I came to speak with his father or his mother today." John looked to the pile of smoldering ash. "But it seems as if that's not in the cards." "Some sad cards today," remarked Auntie. "I came to offer the boy a place, a job. I found Sam last night and was coming today for his family's blessing to bring him north. Is there no next of kin?" John turned to Uncle. "Should I be asking you, sir?" Uncle's age had made him wise. He would not make choices for another man's life. He had lived and fought through a war many years ago that freed him to choose his own path, and he was not about to take that choice from someone else. "He's 12. He can decide on his own," Uncle replied. "I was 10 when I left home." He looked at Sam and tried to give him a little hope. "You have work here if you want it. I'm sure Mr. Cunningham will have you." Mr. Cunningham's name brought flashbacks to the night before through Sam's mind. There was Arabella and the wolf, then Abbot Cunningham firing his gun, the beast, John. There was blood and screaming, a dark figure in the moonlight. Sam tried pushing the thoughts from his mind, but they wouldn't stay buried. No, Mr. Cunningham," Sam replied softly. John gave no betrayal about the night before. Sam looked over the smoldering pile. He had no reason to stay. His family was gone, as was his shared room and the few possessions they had. All of it was burned to ash. Nothing in this world was permanent. Everything had an ending. John knew this truth would someday lead to understanding, but the pain would remain. Sam knew things had changed forever. For the rest of his life, there would be before the fire and after the fire. He heard his own father's voice in his mind. "Make yourself useful now." Without thinking, Sam's feet brought him to his garden at the side of the ash pile that used to be his home. All of the green growth above ground had burned away by the heat of the fire. With his bare hands he dug into the soil, and his fingers found something intact. He pulled out a sweet potato and brought it reverently to Auntie. "I planted these," he said. "Don't you worry about them now," Auntie replied. Sam looked back at the ashes of his house again, then let his gaze drift to the animal pens. "We ain't going to need the chickens and such?" Sam asked John. "We've got a long ways," John replied. "Best if we travel light." Sam turned to Auntie and Uncle. "They make nice eggs. And the pig, Pa said we'd smoke 'em come Easter." Sam had made up his mind. A moment of silence settled in as Sam remembered the words of pride his father had spoken about him. He looked up at John. "I'm a good worker." John blinked. The statement caught him off guard. "How's that?" John asked carefully. "I'm a good worker, sir," Sam replied. John didn't know how to respond. "I'll earn my keep," Sam continued. There was a pause before he added, "North?" John nodded yes. Sam put the potato in his pocket. He started walking. It felt better than just standing there. As Sam's feet took him away from his family home, Auntie's tears flowed. She ran after him and embraced him one last time. When she pulled away, Auntie's chin was quivering, but she still managed to smile. With her thumb, she wiped a tear from her cheek onto Sam's. Her eyes shimmered with hope. Many years, many tears. She let Sam go. Auntie stepped back to Uncle and found comfort on his shoulder. "He'll be all right," comforted Uncle. He turned to John. "He's a good one." John took a breath. He felt honored to witness Sam's simple act of courage. "He's got strong blood," John replied. He put his hand on Uncle's shoulder and gave Auntie a nod. He stepped into the ashes and found the center of what was once the simple shack that Sam called home. He knelt and pulled out a small pouch. He spoke aloud to the lingering spirits. "Your son will be taken care of." John took a few seeds from one of the pouches Letha had given him and pressed them into the ashes. He swirled his hand on the ground, both covering the seeds and collecting a small handful of ash, easing it back into the same pouch. He placed his hand over the spot on the ground and spoke truth. "In the ashes of the past are the seeds of the future." He stood, gave one more look over the burnt remains, and followed Sam. Auntie and Uncle watched John and Sam until they were specks in the distance, blending into the trees. Behind them, neither noticed the small bud already sprouting from the seed John had planted in the ash.